My project today is with a 2008 Chevy Suburban. The problem I'm having is with the air conditioning. It's been sitting several months over the winter without needing the air conditioning. Went to turn it on the other day, started to make a squealing noise, and then after shutting it off with the engine running, there's a rattling sound. So we'll go ahead and look down here. So the air conditioning compressor is down at the bottom on the passenger side of the engine. Reach down in here and show you what I found is that the clutch on the compressor is just falling apart. So that's where my rattling sound's coming from. And of course that's not gonna work properly. My hope is that it's just the clutch that needs to be replaced and not the entire compressor. In comparison, the clutch is going to be a much easier repair. But if you see down in there, it looks like the clutch is pretty rusted up. So my fear is it's not going to come apart very easy, but we'll go ahead and give it a try. I think it's going to be easier to get to from underneath. So I'm going to go ahead and take the plastic cover off the front down there and work on it from down below. Okay, so here we are underneath the vehicle. What I'm going to do is just explain each step that I'm going to take, and then I'll pause the camera and go ahead and make that step. I think fumbling around with tools in front of the camera doesn't really help anything anyway, and I'd like to keep these videos as short as possible. So the first thing you can do, probably want to take the belt off. I'll show you right here. There's a little spot in the idler pulley that you can put a ratchet, and that lets you gain a little leverage to be able to counter that force of that pulley and get the belt off of there. The next thing I'm going to do is remove the center bolt from the pulley of the clutch pulley, or the clutch. And what that will do, so this one's 10 millimeter, and so it's this center pulley right here, or center bolt. And we'll show you here that, so that is actually part of the shaft of the compressor, and right now I can turn that shaft, which is a good sign. That tells me the compressor is not froze up. Turns really easy. But if you do notice, with that, the pulley doesn't turn with the shaft unless the clutch is engaged. So right now I've got nothing to hold that from spinning while I'm trying to take the bolt loose. So since this clutch is bad, what I'm going to do is just probably take a pair of vice grips and grab a hold of this outer ring here and hold it that way. It will probably damage it, but of course this one's junk anyway, so that's not going to matter. If you are taking one off that's maybe not bad, they do make like strap wrenches and stuff you can put around this part of the clutch to hold it. But for what I'm going to do, vice grip will work just fine. So I'll go ahead and take the belt off and take that bolt out, and then we'll come back and show you what the next step is. Okay, so here's the first layer of parts that I took off. So the center bolt, it came out fairly easy. It is right-handed thread, so counterclockwise loosens it. Didn't take much to get it loose. But then these are the pieces that are falling apart. So this is the part that's actually connected to the compressor shaft. And one thing you may want to take note of is that inside of this pocket will be some shims. And what they're doing is keeping the proper clearance from the clutch plate to the magnetic side of the clutch, so that when it's disengaged it doesn't rub, but it's close enough that when it engages the magnetism will hold everything together. So your new clutch should come with shims. You may just want to take note of the ones that you have. It may be one and maybe two different thicknesses. That way you can get it put back together correctly. There will be measurements for clearance, but just in case your new clutch doesn't come with shims, you want to hang on to the ones that came out here. So crawl back underneath here and show you the next step. So got that out of the way. You'll notice now that the pulley, I can move it. That tells me the bearing is completely shot. Underneath this pulley, it should just spin nice and free. But the next thing we'll need to do, there's a snap ring buried underneath here that I'll have to get cleaned up and get that snap ring off. And then that'll let the bearing come off, but again, I'm a little concerned the bearing is going to be seized onto the shaft, so we'll just have to see how hard it comes apart. So next thing I'll do is take that snap ring off, and then we'll take a look at what's underneath there. So here's the snap ring that I removed. It came out fairly easily. The only trouble I had was the snap ring pliers that I've got were not big enough to spread the snap ring wide enough to get it out. So what I ended up doing, take a look here, I moved the jaw past the pin that it's supposed to be on. So this is as closed as it will go, and then it allowed me to open it a little wider. Just a trick you might need to do if you've got a snap ring plier similar to this one. But once I did that, I was able to get the snap ring off with no problem. So we'll look back underneath here. So the next thing I've got set up is I got a puller to pull the pulley and the bearing off of the shaft. What you're not going to want to pry on anything. That's usually not very good for the shaft or the bearing of the compressor itself. So a puller is usually the gentlest way to go. This one I actually borrowed from the parts store that I got the new clutch from. So if you don't have a puller like this, check with your local parts store and see if they've got one you can borrow. The trick is to get one that's small enough and short enough to fit in the space up in here. The next bigger one of these, there's no way it would fit. So I think this one will do the trick. It's a little too small for the size of pulley, but I think as long as it doesn't come off too hard, it should work just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that off of there, and then we'll see what's underneath. Okay, so I got this pulley and bearing assembly off. It actually came off a lot easier than I was expecting. With that puller, all I had to do was really just tighten it by hand and got it to break loose, and it slid right off. So then behind this pulley, which will actually be kind of up inside this pocket here, is the electromagnet. And so then that is held on with another snap ring to the very back. So you'll have to get in there with snap ring pliers and remove that. And then this will just slide right off. This one was stuck on there pretty good. There's a lot of dirt and stuff back in there, which made it tough to get the snap ring out of the groove. But once you get that broke loose, everything else just comes off. Then the other thing you'll have to do is disconnect the wiring. And then this one, the plug was held on to a metal clip with this little tab right at the bottom of it. Zoom in here. So this tab right at the bottom was held on to a metal tab that's bolted to the side of the compressor. So I had to take that loose in order to get this to come off so that I could take this out. So then over here is all the new stuff. So it'll go on just in reverse. This one did come with new shims. These are all different thicknesses, and then the instructions tell me that on a new one, the clearance should be 18 to 30 thousandths. So that's between this face and this face. So when this goes on here, you'll just take a thickness gauge and measure in between. If the measurement's not correct, then you take it apart and you change out the shims, either thicker or thinner, depending on what you need. So I'm going to go ahead and start the reassembly process, and then we'll take a look at how that goes together. Before I get into the assembly or reassembly of the clutch, a couple things I wanted to point out first. Be sure to get up in here and clean this up good with like a wire brush, especially the grooves for the snap rings. If there's any dirt or anything built up in there, the snap rings are not going to seat in properly. The other thing I wanted to point out was on the magnet, I don't know if you can see this, but there's a pin, see it on the top there, that That pin is actually for anti-rotation. So there's a certain spot that it has to go on, and then that also orients the wires correctly. So if you notice on this side of my compressor, there's a little pocket back here. That pocket gives some relief for the wires. So this goes on this way, and that pin fits in a groove on the other side. So that way it fits in there snug, and the wires aren't being pinched. So before you take your old one off, just take note of which direction the wires are facing. That way you'll get the new one put back on correctly. So, all right, I'm going to finish the installation and then we'll come back and take a look at it. Here's what the new clutch looks like after it's fully installed. Just put it back together in the reverse order that it came apart. The most difficult part that I had putting this together was that first snap ring that you have to put on to hold the magnet in place. Was pretty difficult to get to. It's down inside of a pocket. It's hard to see, hard to get your fingers in there to line it up. But just be sure to take your time and make sure that one's in place. You don't want that one coming off. On this installation, that snap ring was actually beveled on one edge, and that needs to be facing away from the compressor towards the front of the vehicle. What that does is it lets it wedge itself down into the groove, which holds that magnet on as tight as possible. So check your instructions, look at your snap ring really close, make sure that if it is beveled that you have it turned the correct direction. Then also, once you get it fully assembled, be sure to check the gap. So right here between the outer plate and the pulley. So this is where you would check it, but just put a feeler gauge in there. So my kit came with 3 shims, and they were measuring, 2 of them measured 15 thousandths and 1 of them measured 20 thousandths. So what you got to do is just pick a place to start and then measure it and then do the math and either add or remove a shim to get you in place. So right now this is at 23, which is just about in the middle of the 18 to 30 that it's calling for. Be sure to measure it in several places around the pulley just to be sure everything's nice and flush. And then lastly, there is a torque spec for that center bolt. But if you turn this whole outer piece is going to want to turn. So this is back to where I would use what I call a strap wrench. Just a rubber band. This one's rubber, some of them are fabric. But you can just put that around that, and then it just wedges, kind of like an oil filter wrench. But that'll help you hold it in place to torque that center down. That way you're not trying to do a vice grip trick or a big pair of channel locks. So also while I'm doing this, I'm going to go ahead and put on new belts. The belts that are on here are not terrible. If I wasn't already working on it, I probably wouldn't bother with it. But as long as I'm this far, I'm going to go ahead and put on both the air conditioning and the main Serpentine belts. So to get the belt loose for the main Serpentine drive, see in the video this pulley up top here. So that's your spring-loaded idler for the main belt. You'll be able to use a wrench to pry against that, and that'll help you get some slack on the belt to be able to take the belt off. So I'll show you how to do that from the top side of the vehicle. But then when you take that off, take this belt off, and then put your new air conditioning belt on. And again, just this pulley, you just put the ratchet in there and turn it and get yourself some slack, and then you can get the pulley on and replace them. So the other thing I'll do is I will show you my instructions at the end of the video, just so you can see some of the specifications and instructions that came with mine. We'll give you an idea what that beveled snap ring looks like as well. So hopefully your kit comes with instructions, but sometimes the cheaper ones don't. So just in case, you can reference mine instead. Okay, so looking down at that pulley from the top of the engine compartment, what you can do is just get a wrench or ratchet on there, and then
rotate against it and you see how the belt gets slack, and that'll let you lift the belt off over the pulleys. And then what you do is when you get the new one on there, put it over this pulley last and just give it a pull, and it'll give you enough slack to get that in there. Before you start, just take note of the routing of the belt. This outer one is a little more complicated, but a good rule of thumb is to note any of the pulleys that have grooves. The belt is on the inside, and then any of the pulleys that are smooth runs on the outside of the belt. So if you do get lost on how to route that, that's just one way to kind of help you figure out which way to go. So last thing I'm going to do is I'll do a little video clip of my instructions, just in case your pulley or your clutch does not come with instructions. That way you can see what I saw. Hopefully that'll give you one more little bit of advice. Okay, so these are the instructions that came with my clutch. This just shows you how things stack together. And then up here is where it's showing you what the clearance spec was for measuring the outer plate and where to measure that. So there's that picture, and then on the other side, just show you, here's that snap ring for the electromagnet, where it's showing you that it does have a beveled edge. So you want the bevel to the outside. That way it kind of fits in the groove and self-locks. So if you did it backwards, you'll have it this way and it's not actually going to hold anything. So be sure to do that if yours is the same way. If you do have instructions, good to glance through them. But hope this helps, and if you like my video, be sure to give me a thumbs up, and thanks for watching.